Many times, the pain of divorce, rape, illness, injury, abuse, whether physical or emotional, leaves us impassioned. We often find ourselves alone during these long, dark days. Often it isn't the initiating trauma that creates seemingly insurmountable pain, but the lack of support thereafter. We may not have all the answers, but together we can talk about it and possibly point you in the right direction. You can find comfort in knowing that someone out there has gone through the same situation and they're managing. I'm Hugo de Batika and welcome to Cope, a show designed to help those around us by sharing the stories that impact us the hardest. Hello everyone and thank you for joining us on Cope, and a big welcome to Tinashe KUSHATA, being our very first guest. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Hugo. Happy to be here.
Now, in your bio, you describe yourself as a chronic illness warrior. Describe some of the battles you've had to endure.
Wow, that's a very big question. When it comes to the chronic illnesses I've had to battle in my life, they've ranged from diabetes, type 2, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, adenomyosis, hypertension, obesity, and yeah, I think that's pretty much sums it up. I'm probably forgetting something, but that and the symptoms that affect those chronic illnesses is something that I had to kind of fight throughout my life.
So before we dig into specific illnesses, what is it that qualifies an illness to be chronic?
Well, what makes an illness chronic is dependent on how long you have it for. So typically if it's something that's so repetitive or you have it for longer than 3 months, that's how it's usually categorized as a chronic illness.
So when did you discover that you had all these acute conditions?
Well, the discovery was probably much earlier in my childhood, but when I was 11, when I started my menstrual cycle, that's when we started noticing things happening in my body. And then upon investigation, you know, when people ask you questions like, when did you start noticing this? Or, oh my goodness, did you notice she liked eating salty things? Or, oh my goodness, your mom felt like this when she was pregnant with you. So all of a sudden you realize that the symptoms were there, but of course the people around me were not aware that those are like significant symptoms. But the main curve came when I was 11, when my menstrual cycle started, then it stopped and started and stopped. So then we investigated further, and then you started realizing that, we just opened a can of worms.
Ironic that you talk about opening a can of worms. You've obviously had to undergo a number of surgeries over the last couple of decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has been so much fun. But yes, I have had a few procedures, 17 by my count, all over my body. It varies: head, mouth, stomach, uterus. But yeah, I think we're at 17. 18 was supposed to happen, but thank you, COVID. But yeah, so 17.
I'm astounded. 17. How do you manage to go through all of that? The pain, the anguish, continually in a hospital, obviously. How have you managed?
With my parents, who are my best friends. They are so hopeful and so full of love and support. So I think their faith that I could push made me want to push. And then also having so much excitement about my own intellect. So I always try to get excited about fulfilling my purpose in life. So every time a procedure comes along, it's like, okay, it's just another hump. Then after that, I get back to doing what Tinashe does, which is helping people get to where they need to get to in the best mental health space that they can be in.
Now, I can only imagine going through surgery once, twice, never mind 3 times. But what is it that's kept you motivated, that's kept you determined? Where's this inspiration that you have?
Well, to keep going through it is sometimes it's not about inspiration. It's like you have to. Like the issues will keep coming back, and then you have to consistently try to eradicate certain things. But it's really just trusting these medical professionals at the end of the day, that they know what they're doing. So I will be better. So that's like the main thing that keeps the fight alive and the drive. It's like, okay, yes, this is 17, but could have been 50. So let's go for number 17 in hopes to never reach number 50. So it's basically just trying to find ways of getting some kind of consistency and better quality of life. So that motivates me.
Now, obviously, we understand that going through these processes, illness, surgery, etc., with it must come a certain amount of grief. You know, in the process of having to deal with all of this. What sort of steps have you taken in that grieving process?
I mean, first of all, I had to learn that I was grieving. So I had to look it up. And grief is basically when you suddenly have a conflict of different emotions because something big has happened, a big change in your life. And all of those things are conflicting and you're trying to manage. So basically, I mean, it was one thing to find out that I was unwell. But then when the procedure started, it made it more of a reality, right? And then with that reality, it meant sacrificing. Like actively saying, now that I'm focusing on my health, I can't go to this thing, I can't travel, I can't eat this, I can't drink that. So I had to grieve the loss of a life that I wanted or dreamt I would have, that me and my whole family had planned for forever. You know, all of those ambitions, they kind of, you know, they were still maintained, but it kind of had to also be kind of sidestepped. So that I had to grieve. I continue to grieve because I'm still going through it. So there's a lot of things I would have wanted to have done, which I had to put to the side. So constantly, I grieve for my body, I grieve for myself, I grieve for my life. But through that grief, there's an acceptance of the way life is, and you just kind of have to get on board and make do with what you have.
Understandably, Tinashe, there are challenges in this entire process. But let's look at you as an 11-year-old trying to come to terms with all of this versus now, that journey. Can you take us through that journey?
Oh, wow. I guess, I think at the beginning it was very like, okay, cool. It's like having a pimple. Okay, sure, don't touch it. You have this, you're unwell. But then gradually with time, with growth, especially as a woman, more illnesses start to tap in. So I think over the years, then it became like you have to consistently be facing it. And then with those realizations meant going under the knife. So, and the times that I went under the knife were so close to each other. It's not like it was spread through the last 29 years. It was literally just like a good 10 years where it's been back to back.
Jeez.
So it's a whole wave. All of a sudden you're more in patient mode. So before that, it's like I can still go to practice, play sport because I'll be fine, I'll manage. Then after some time, it's like, why would you even sign up? Like, clearly we know what we're doing. This year, we're doing body. We're focusing on the body. We are doing things that are more, you know, low key and managing the body. So I think the journey basically has become more of a, illness, here you are, my friend. We're walking this journey together. And then with time, it's just like, illness becomes that big sister that puts you in check. Like, we're no longer have to be buddy all the time. You have to do what you gotta do to make sure things get done. So more and more it's become, a sibling that used to be like, oh, you know, he was a friendly friend. Now it's like an older person who's consistently keeping you aware of where you are and to think clearly about what you're capable of.
Now, you spoke about the amazing support that your parents have given you. Let's talk a little about how they've coped. They've obviously been there for you, but have you seen that they've had their own challenges? How have they dealt with those challenges? Because obviously nobody wants this for their daughter.
No, for sure. I mean, for the parts that I've been privy to, I mean, they definitely, you know, we are, you know, a Christian family. We've leaned into prayer, speaking with friends of theirs, speaking with colleagues, you know, just, I guess, basically surrounding themselves with positive people who've also helped with insight. And I know that they do not like looking like they're crying or anything in front of me. So I imagine they have had shoulders to cry on and been able to come back with that strong force that I've always had. So I do, as a counselor as well, I completely understand that they are getting their support from somewhere to be able to show up and support me. So I think it's really come from a space of family, friends, and actually the curiosity to understand what their daughter is going through, because I think knowledge is power. So the minute I have easier conversations with them, or they feel more in tune with what I'm going through, I can see the relief and also the anticipation of, okay, this is the doable hump. You know, we're in this together, and that gives everyone a bit of a, okay, cool. So and then I feel like I don't have to consistently be like, no, listen to me, understand it the way I understand it. So those are all little mechanisms we've used along the way to kind of manage with the situation. But I'm sure they would tell you way more things they've done that I don't know about.
Probably. Now, you talked about sport and obviously extracurricular activities. What has been taken away from you, and what are you still involved in?
What has been taken away from me? You know, funny enough, it feels like things have been taken away from me, but technically they have not, in the sense that I'm a pusher, I'm resilient. I'm that person who will do something and then cry in pain afterwards. So my parents would tell you that I was the captain in sport, I was directing musical theater programs, doing musical theater myself, I was doing softball, I played cricket. And then at VITS, I was involved in res life. I was in committees on campus. So I think there's always been there's a lot of moments where I've been told to slow down or to stop, and I didn't listen. So where they think, oh no, but you still got to do it. I'm like, yeah, well, I probably would have been president of that thing, but I was only secretary because I was sick. So for me, that feels like sacrifice. I could have been an even better Tinashe, but the truth is that I rarely would give up something unless I literally can't do it because I am going to theater tomorrow. So, but I'm a limper. I limp through things, I push through things, and I would rather cry afterwards than miss the opportunity because I'm unwell, which is also a bad thing.
We're speaking to Tinashe KUSHATA. Very, very insightful discussion. And when we come back, she'll take us through her role as a counselor and also the grief that she's had to endure following the loss of a loved one only a few months ago. Welcome back. You're watching Cope, and we have in the studio Tinashe KUSHATA. Tinashe, you describe yourself as a chronic illness warrior. Now, have you lost any relationships because of the illness you've had over these many, many years?
Yes, I have, Hugo, unfortunately. Romantic and general relationships. On the romantic front, I guess because I'm an empath, I kind of understand why things sometimes don't work out, because it must be scary to want to be in a relationship with someone who goes through so much. It's almost like you feel expected to show up a bit extra. And also it's that little weird feeling of not knowing if they're gonna live for long. You know, people...
But then you're a warrior, right?
I am a warrior, sure, but it's one thing when you see me like this, talking to you, and the next thing you see me with a drip hanging out, and I just woke up and you're just looking over me. So I think that in my past relationships has really caused a drift. Like, people won't say it, but because I'm a counselor, I usually can smell it. Whereas, I didn't sign up for this, you know, I'm not a caretaker, I just wanted a girlfriend. So yeah, so I've had to kind of combat that. And then in general friendships, because mobility and availability changes when you're unwell. So showing up for certain events, you know, a lot of people's friendships lean on being there with each other in public, eating, drinking. I mean, at some point I was on liquids for 3 months and I couldn't drink alcohol. So there's a lot of friendships. I mean, I love the fact that my illness did that for me, because it kind of cut out the really, you know, really baseless friendships. Because some people, I realize, if we're not eating or drinking together, we actually have nothing to do or talk about. So it kind of just canceled them out of my equation. And because of that, I have very few friends who are pretty much life partners to me.
Now, sadly, a few months ago, you lost somebody very dear to you.
Yes, that's right. I lost my best friend. The love of my life, we would call each other. If I could have a wife, she would have been. We were supposed to get married by 40 if we didn't get married to someone else by then. But yes, my best friend, Busisi Mpembe, passed away in April this year.
Not only was it tragic, but it was also very sudden, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very sudden. I mean, like I said, I surround myself with people who genuinely take care of me. So in a world where her job was taking care of me, like she's the one who shows up with flowers every time I open my eyes after surgery. So half the time we were planning about how she would cope if I was gone. And then all of a sudden she just got sick overnight and then she was gone. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's absolutely hard to reconcile with that, even as someone who understands what grief is. It's just so unthinkable. Like, I've dealt with a lot of surprises, but this one by far has been the most unexpected and what I feel is unnecessary. Like, I think people would be sad if I died, but it's a, whew, but she fought, man. But with her, it's like, how do you laugh and hug someone and say, I'll see you in a few days? And then in 2 weeks, you're at their funeral. It makes no sense.
Now, obviously, this was at the start of the lockdown. And with the lockdown, you having underlying conditions, this obviously has impacted in many ways your way of life.
Oh my goodness, yes it has. Well, in one aspect with her funeral and everything, I mean, when it comes to mourning, I'm a believer in crowding around people, feeding each other, hugging each other, drinking together, crying together, watching a movie. But because COVID had already hit and the lockdown was enforced, everyone was pretty much doing it on their own. There were only 50 people allowed at her funeral, and I'm so grateful her family really insisted that I be one of them. And unfortunately, even going to the funeral, I went with my mother by my side, but it was very stressful because as much as the grief is there, there's going to be other people, and I am a chronically ill person. So, and catching COVID is something that we are consistently anxious about in our household. Like literally my parents even think about where they're going to go. Friends know that, you know, if they're going to see me, let's just meet outside, like very far apart, because they know that the risk for me is, it's a matter of, we just never want to find out how Tina is going to react to COVID, because we know that as much as I'm a strong girl, we don't know actually if my immune system has that much of a gut punch with it right now, considering my last procedure was just 3 months ago.
Now, the loss that you've suffered, have you dealt with it? Are you dealing with it? What has that process been for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of denial. The denial phase was quite intense. I mean, yeah, like, I don't know. I've never been married. So I was wondering, like, is this how it feels to lose a wife or a partner? Because it's someone the first person you speak to when you wake up, the last person you speak to when you sleep. So the coping for me was now actually looking at messages and realizing last seen or last spoke 8 weeks ago or something like that. So once I started kind of getting over the denial, I finally made an appointment with my therapist. Yes, I have a therapist, a very necessary therapist. And then I started a grief counseling program that was designed for me based on the kind of relationship I had with her. But the truth is that no matter what I've been managing, so I meditate, I speak with my counselor, I reminisce with her family when we get a chance. But at the end of the day, it's like my mother was saying that it's gonna be, right now we are so contained because of the pandemic and the lockdown. So she thinks that when we open up and life goes back to normal, and starting to go out, because I would always be with her. So just literally going for lunch or going for a meeting or going to a certain building or going past a certain road, like she thinks that's when the wave is truly gonna hit, when I'm able to keep bumping into people who want to consistently be talking to you about her. So I think right now it feels like I'm almost in training.
Yeah.
Because the real blow really might yet be to come. Like, this is pretty much the first time I've spoken to someone about it who's not my therapist or my family or my friends. And it feels okay to talk about, but I can imagine that, you know, if you bump into 5 people down the road at the same time and they're like, oh my goodness, oh goodness, you know, it's like there's that constant reigniting. So my mother's trying to prepare me in her best way. She's like, just remember that right now you might think you're okay, but just keep working on it because it's not going to get easier.
Well, the one thing we do know about you is that you're a pretty selfless individual. One of the things you do is you counsel others.
Yeah.
In fact, 12-hour shifts overnight that you have to put through. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
I have one right now, just after this. But, but yes, I work for the South Africa Depression and Anxiety Group. So they started as a support group here in South Africa, trying to help people dealing with depression. And yeah, so I work for them 24 hours a week currently. So that's 2 after-hour shifts, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So that was never my intention to work such crazy hours. Like I deal with at least 120 calls a night, with 30 of them becoming major cases that you like stay on the line for a while and try to manage the case. So like, I know my voice sounds great right now, but I'm literally struggling with laryngitis because I've been using my voice so much.
I'm glad you raised that, Tina, because I was speaking to a colleague some time ago, and he mentioned that he had to film an episode of a show in which depression was talked about, and he said it was extremely heavy for him, emotionally draining. Now, 120 calls, 30 of them intense. The emotional turmoil there must be hectic.
I mean, it really is hectic, but I think that it's actually been easier than I thought it would be. Shout out to SADAG. I have a really great supervisor, a call center manager. We check in on each other. We do meditations every week. You know, there's certain check-ins you do with your senior people in the company. But more than anything, I think it's just that hunger that I have to solve things. And more specifically, like someone will call and they'll be, for example, talking about, you know, a parent that they live with, or they're having issues and they just at their wits' end that day. And you just try to get them to picture their life, and I ask them to just tell me what they want their life to look like. And so there's such joy that comes from something that I can think of as a solution in 2 seconds. Someone has been crying about for 5 hours trying to think, who can I talk to? So it's very important for me that I keep that routine of help, then check in with someone, which is my therapist or my supervisor, and get some rest. Like I said, it's 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and I'm not a good sleeper, but I do my best to immediately sleep up until 2 p.m. if I can, 4 hours. So it's just and then exercising and then meditating, and then you do it again the next day.
Now, something that's very topical at the moment is mental illness. What are the common causes of mental illness?
There are a lot of common causes for mental illness. I hope it's okay with you if I read, because I always find that a lot of people seem to limit mental illness, and they think that it's just, you know, kids can't get depressed. You know, why do you think you have mental illness? What is that thing, right? So according to my research, well, I use this as a crutch in my own work. It can be childhood abuse, trauma, or neglect. So that's all happening while you're a child. So that's before you're like 16. Social isolation or loneliness, what we're experiencing right now with the pandemic. People being isolated, it's triggering a lot of, you know, uncertainty, and that's mental illness. Experiencing stigma or discrimination, hence anyone who's experienced racism or homophobia, those kinds of things can be triggered into a state of mental illness. Then loss, you've touched on loss and grief and bereavement. Long-term stress, especially when people are working. The ability to not secure jobs, that's a trigger for mental illness. So when I say like there can be so many of them, and of course domestic violence or any kind of violence that you can experience as an adult, which is getting into a car accident, getting robbed, anything that triggers you because someone has been violent towards you.
And if you do happen to have mental illness, where do you go? Who do you go to? Who do you phone? What channels are available?
Help is everywhere. That's what people really do not like to realize. And I think people know that help is everywhere most of the time, but they are very afraid to start that process of going somewhere and admitting that they're unwell. But the most basic thing, all government hospitals have a psychiatric ward or a wing or a department 24 hours. So you can literally walk in and ask to see the psychologist or the counselor on call, and they will see you for free. And SADAG, which I work for, South Africa Depression Anxiety Group, we run, I think last time I checked, it's 18 helplines, toll-free helplines, where you can call in if you're having issues with substance abuse, if you're having issues with depression, with anxiety, you're bipolar, whatever you can think of under the sun, you can call in for free. Thanks to all our sponsors, we're able to all be on shift to help anyone who has any need. And we have a database of professionals, so immediately after the calls, we refer you to a medical professional in your region, whether you have funds or not, who will be able to take up the case and follow through with you long term.
Tinashe, you're truly a warrior, and we salute you. Thank you so much for coming onto the very first show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to see all the things you guys are going to achieve and the people you're going to touch with these stories.
Fabulous. Thank you again for being a part of COPE. We're back again next week at the very same time. Remember, together we can. Goodbye.